Hi everyone, it's me, Dr. Whimsy. How are you today? Hopefully you're doing well and taking good care of yourself. Today I'm having a conversation about how to lower your cholesterol. How to lower your cholesterol, and I want to add to that how to lower your triglycerides. And the reason we're focusing on cholesterol levels and triglycerides is because there's been a considerable amount of research over the years, as everyone is well aware, who keeps up with health, that high cholesterol and high triglycerides places you at higher risk for heart disease. That's pretty hard science. So we're going to have a conversation today about if you do have high cholesterol, as some of us do. If you do have high triglycerides, there are things you can do, and they're fairly simple, and hopefully they don't cost much money. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk first a little bit about what these levels are that we're looking at when we look at somebody's labs. If you've gotten a copy of your labs and you're trying to make sense of them, I just want to first go over them. One of the first values we look at is something called your total cholesterol. That is all the various different types of cholesterol, your LDL, your VDL, your HDL. We want to get a total picture. And right now, the goal is, we're saying, to have a total cholesterol of less than 200. If it's at 200, that is considered just fine, and anything below that. Now, people who are actively involved, physicians that are actively involved in heart health, are talking about wanting to have a total cholesterol below 180, and others have said that people who have a total cholesterol of 150 to below are heart attack proof. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Certainly, if your total cholesterol is low, that's a good thing, but there are other reasons why a person might be at risk for heart disease. For example, if they were born with a birth defect, a weak heart valve or a wall, those are also risks for heart disease. So it's not just cholesterol that causes heart attack or heart disease. It is one factor of many that we look at when we are trying to help people stay healthy. So total cholesterol, we want to see it at 200 or less. We also want to, that's milligrams per deciliter. That's the measurement we use. Triglycerides, we try to keep those below 150 milligrams per deciliter. Those are the biggies. And we want to see the HDL, which is the good cholesterol, above 40 milligrams per deciliter. A little bit about cholesterol. The LDL cholesterol is the type of cholesterol that carries lipids to the tissue from the liver. So it's carrying fat to the tissue. Now it can become oxidized. That process of oxidizing cholesterol is really what we're concerned about. That is LDL. It's carrying the lipids from the liver to the tissue, where problems can get started. HDL is the form of cholesterol that takes fat, takes these lipids from the tissue and returns it back to the liver, where it can be processed, hopefully either used, eliminated, etc. Usually it's used. One way to use it is when you have calorie restriction, the simple act of calorie restriction, where you're starting to burn those lipids. We can see a drop in total cholesterol. So hardening of the arteries is that process where we see LDL becoming oxidized or damage to the LDL. That is something that we monitor. Oxidative stress is the process where we see tissue being damaged due to oxidative stress, and oxidation or oxidizing of LDL. That happens when we consume too much sugar. Sugar combined with LDL is definitely a risk factor for heart disease and can lead to hardening of the arteries. This is especially true as we age because our tissue becomes less receptive to LDL. It becomes less able to take up LDL and process LDL, and so those lipids are more likely to wind up in the arteries where they can be exposed to oxygen and free radicals, and at that point the LDL becomes what we call oxidized, and that is the beginning of hardening of the arteries. I'm showing pictures hopefully that you can take a look at so you see that process. Now, we used to think that a heart attack happened because the arteries would narrow and then blood would not be able to flow normally. That's certainly something we're concerned with, narrowing of the arteries. We now are looking at plaques, that tissue, that oxidized tissue, that oxidized LDL, and other products that are part of a plaque. When that plaque is unstable and breaks off from the arterial wall, bleeding can ensue, and from that bleeding we can see clotting. That is really what we now think happens in the event of a heart attack. So when we look at these different types of cholesterols, we look at another type of LDL, specifically VLDL. VLDL is the very low density lipids, and those are the ones that seem to be causing the most trouble, and they're also the type of LDL that seems to be most likely to attach to a sugar. So again, it goes back to the person who might have an elevated sugar, and the elevated sugar, it's not just that they have high cholesterol, they also have high sugar. So that combination of a blood that is high in sugar combined with the high LDL is the concern. It's not just the LDL itself, but it's the LDL or the VLDL with high sugar. It's at that point that we see increased risk for damage to the tissue. And the VLDL attaching to the sugar, it becomes what we call glycosylated. And that in turn can cause damage to the tissue. That glycosylation that is happening with the VLDL that is then taken up in the tissue, damaging the tissue. All right, so another thing that we are looking at is something called an LPA, lipoprotein A, and that's the plasma lipoprotein that helps the LDL actually stick to the wall. It actually helps it stick to the arterial wall where it wreaks havoc and poses additional risk to our health. So we may be looking, when we're looking at your cardiac markers, particularly you're at risk, we want to be checking your fasting glucose levels in addition to checking the other markers as well. The LPA, we'd like to see that at below 20 milligrams per deciliter. So in terms of the triglycerides being elevated, that is something that I see a lot in people who eat a lot of carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates get stored as glycogen in the liver, and then when the glycogen stores are extremely high, the body will then take that glycogen. That glucose gets stored as a product called glycogen. When we have adequate stores of glycogen, our body then goes on and makes triglycerides. So definitely elevated triglycerides is associated with consuming too many simple sugars. So what do we do about it from a naturopathic perspective? How do we help you stay healthy? Are there any supplements you can take? Well, there are a lot of supplements you can take, but let's start with lifestyle, because one of the first things we do in naturopathic medicine is we encourage people to remove the cause. What caused us to become ill in the first place? So number one thing on the list that I talk to patients about is calorie restriction. Simply reducing caloric intake can lower your cholesterol, and it can also lower your fasting glucose, because if you're simply eating less calories, you're going to slowly see a decline in glucose. So we talk to patients about calorie restriction and weight loss. That is one of the first conversations we talk about. Second thing we talk about is the quality of the food itself. Is it a whole food? Is it a plant-based? Hopefully it's plant-based, it's nutrient dense, it's unprocessed, and it's got a low glycemic index. We really look at the glycemic load and the glycemic index, particularly if we're trying to lower the triglycerides of a patient. So we want weight loss, we want to have whole foods in the diet, we want to look at the glycemic load, the glycemic index, to get that glucose down, to get that weight down, and we want it to be a predominantly or 100% plant-based diet so that we can not take in any additional cholesterol. People will say to me, well, come on, doctor, it's genetic. I make all this cholesterol, so therefore I don't have to change my diet because it's genetic. Unfortunately for you, if you do have familial hyperlipidemia, the perfect diet for you would be 100% plant-based vegan diet, and that's because if you already are making too much cholesterol, we don't want you ingesting any cholesterol. However, if it's diet related, we can tweak the diet if it's a junk food or if it's a bad diet, and you may in fact be able to have some cholesterol at the end of the day if the predominant cause was that you had just a really bad diet. So familial hyperlipidemia is not going to get you off the hook. So we want to talk to people about a whole foods plant-based diet. If you can't be 100% plant-based, if you're not willing to be 100% whole foods plant-based, then we want you to try and get to 90%. The type of food should be what we call a whole food, low index, a low glycemic load. That means avoiding things that are processed, white flour, sugar, corn syrup, things that are prepackaged. Diet soda is not your friend. It has all kinds of other problems. If you're switching over to processed food that doesn't contain sugar, you're not helping yourself. We are talking to people about whole foods, not diet soda, not prepackaged lean cuisine. No disrespect to the people who produce lean cuisine. It's just not the type of a diet that I place patients on. In terms of supplementation, when we're talking to patients about that diet, we always want to talk to them about fiber. There's two types of fiber. There's soluble and insoluble. Both soluble and insoluble fiber can help you lower your cholesterol, but it's mostly the soluble fiber that we're looking at. Soluble fiber is the type of fiber that dissolves in water. An example would be agar gum. All plant foods contain both soluble and insoluble fiber. So if you're eating more plant foods, you're eating more fiber, and fiber soaks up cholesterol, particularly the cholesterol that's being dumped by the liver. It dumps any cholesterol. It goes from the liver to the gallbladder, and from there it's dumped into the small intestine. Hopefully, if you're on a high fiber diet, it'll then be soaked up by that soluble fiber, and then it will be eliminated, so it will not be reabsorbed and recirculated. That is why we talk to people about a high fiber diet. If you absolutely want to have some animal products in your diet, and if you are struggling on a plant-based diet, the best food is usually fish, and that's because fish actually in research has been found to lower triglycerides, and it's associated with increased lifespan, even if it's only one fish meal a week. So if you're talking about the one type of animal protein that is associated with better health, it's fish. Egg whites are also an option if you feel like you need some animal protein. Low-fat dairy is allowed by Dean Ornish when he puts his program together. People are allowed low-fat dairy. Find out what works for you. All right, so in terms of supplementation, niacin was part of what was known as the AIM-HIGH study. High doses of niacin were found to raise HDL, and HDL is, again, the type of cholesterol that carries lipids, fats away from the tissue towards the liver where they can be processed. But I would argue that that's not going to help you if you're not on a calorie restricted diet and exercising and burning lipids. That is really the recipe for success, is you've got to be out there, you've got to be exercising, you've got to be moving. So niacin can cause a flush, so a lot of people don't do well on the niacin. There is the slow niacin in the 250 milligram and 500 milligram capsules. You might want to start with the 250 milligrams and get used to it. I like a good coenzyme form or active form of a B complex. That is definitely helpful. And we have people take a B complex, not just the B12 by itself, but the B complex. And we also, you can take one of those a day. I'll link all of this stuff below in terms of the companies that I like. Garlic, that is high in active allicin, has also been effective in terms of heart health. And CoQ10, the type that I pick is what's called the Q Best, and that's because it's a nanoparticle. It's been ground into a fine powder, so it's taken up better. And CoQ10 can also reduce the amount of oxidative stress or free radicals that could be putting you at risk for heart disease. So those are just some of the ideas we have for reducing your risk of heart disease, lowering cholesterol and triglycerides. And don't forget, of course, physical activity, very important. The more you move, the more you breathe, definitely the better for your health if you're trying to lose weight, stabilize your blood sugar, and lower that cholesterol. Okay, I want to thank you for watching this video. Be sure and share, like, subscribe, and tell me what you are doing to improve your health. Hopefully you're doing it naturally and you've got a great naturopath. If you'd like to find out more about naturopathic medicine or find a physician in your area, you can contact the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. I'll link them below. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and take care. Bye-bye.